Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen, and I am the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. So great to have you here. Happy Pride. Pride continues. And as always, I am joined here by PFLAG's Director of Learning and Inclusion, my good friend, Jean Marie Nevada.
Hi, Liz.
Hello, Jean Marie. Look at that.
Look, it's the second week of Pride. So last week we had the fam. This week I have my ears. You don't even know what's going to happen next week.
I'm a little afraid to ask for fear our boss might be watching.
Don't ask. You're the Director of Communications. I like surprising you.
And on that frightening note, have a good show.
Thanks, Liz. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she, and if you speak Spanish, ella. Every single week, we get together to talk about a new topic. And this week, we are talking about life on campus for college students, how to find a great college that's inclusive for queer students. And we are using an article that was actually on bestcolleges.com. But I am certainly never here to have the conversation myself. And so I am really excited to introduce our two guests this week. We have Jerry St. Louis, who's an intern of the Trans Policy Coordinator from Campus Pride, and Jenny Beeman, the director of the Stonewall Center at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Live long and prosper. I was excited to see that. Oh my gosh, you just won me over right away with that. Oh, this is so exciting. So, my friends, this article really details what students should be looking for in finding a inclusive university or college environment. And it lists a bunch of different kinds of features that you should be paying attention to. I think there were 5 of them, things like clubs and organizations, inclusive facilities, safe zone programs, things like that. So I want to start with our first question, which was, as you looked at this article and as you looked at this list, do you think those 5 indicators or 5 elements are a good indicator of if you're going to find a queer-friendly and inclusive university? And Jenny, I was wondering if you could start the conversation for us.
Sure. So this is one of those instances where you collaborate with somebody and they produce something that they don't vet with you and they really screw it up. I really do not like this article at all. And I can go on for a long time, but I'll make just a few points about what I don't like about it. For one, pretty much all colleges have an LGBTQ plus group. Most have more than one. So that's really not a very important thing to be looking at. More important from my perspective is what kind of activities groups do they have for like trans students, bi-pan students, BIPOC, queer and trans people of color. Those groups are underrepresented, often marginalized on campuses and in LGBTQ plus groups. It mentions facilities and gender inclusive restrooms, but doesn't really say anything about them. I believe that every building on campus should have several gender inclusive restrooms. It mentions gender inclusive housing, but really what all campuses need to be doing is to assign housing based upon gender identity, not what's on legal documents, and so that all campus can have gender inclusive housing and not just in one particular area on campus. It mentions LGBTQ plus campus centers. That's important, but they need to be professionally staffed. There needs to be a staff person on campus whose job it is to be supporting, advocating for LGBTQ plus students, because that shouldn't be the job of students to do that. They're students first and foremost. There should be someone whose job it is every day to be out there in the trenches pushing for the campus to be more LGBTQ plus inclusive. All of the campuses that are considered to be the most LGBT supportive, all of them have professional staff people whose job it is to be supporting LGBTQ plus students. Having an advisory group, which is one of the recommendations, really is not that important. An advisory group is going to meet maybe once, twice a semester. Really having someone whose job day to day is supporting LGBT students is really what is most critical. In the code of conduct area, really what needs to happen there, which is not specified, is that non-discrimination policies need to include gender identity need to include sexual orientation as protected classes, and that misgendering by faculty and staff of students needs to be treated by campuses as a Title IX violation, as being a form of sex discrimination, and that needs to be prosecuted very vigorously, and that's not even mentioned either. And a couple of things I'll just mention that aren't even, not even in the article. The need for there to be LGBTQ plus supportive physical and mental health care. We know from many research studies, including my own, that LGBTQ plus students experience extremely high rates of depression and anxiety because of discrimination, harassment they experience. So there needs to be a counseling staff there who's familiar with LGBTQ plus students and their concerns, hopefully out faculty and staff as well who can be supportive. And there needs to be also, for those students who are transitioning, there needs to be medical providers who can help them through that process, be able to get hormones on campus, to have hormones and surgeries be covered under student health insurance. That's not mentioned at all either. And then the last point I'll make is that the article ignores the specific needs of trans students to be just recognized and respected, to have the name that they go by, the pronouns they go by, be on campus records and documents. So they can be treated as how they see themselves in all contexts. That really gender identity needs to be forefronted, and how someone is assigned at birth needs to be forgotten about unless there's a legal need to have that information be put out there. And that's a very few contexts. And that's, again, not mentioned at all in the article.
And can I just ask one follow-up question? Because Jerry, I want to hear about what your take on this list was. But you mentioned about housing and doing housing based on gender identification rather than assigned sex. Are you seeing a trend towards this? Are more universities doing this, or is this still pretty rare?
It's still really rare. A couple of public universities in Oregon, I think Portland State and Oregon State are the ones who do it. A couple of small liberal arts colleges. At UMass Amherst, we're moving to do that. We would have had it now except for COVID, set everything back, including making that happen. Because we really care about how someone identifies. It doesn't matter how they were assigned at birth. And so it's ridiculous to be assigning housing based upon something that doesn't really matter for trans people.
Yeah, and it will matter if somebody is segregated into the wrong area, and that's suddenly when it's going to become very, very relevant. Thank you. I was really interested in that. And Jerry, I just realized I probably mangled your last name and had a moment of absolute horror at my terrible, terrible pronunciation. I did, didn't I?
Actually, if you did, I didn't hear it. If you said St. Louis or St. Louis, either or is fine.
St. Louis came out, but it should have been St. Louis. So I'm so sorry. I apologize totally okay. for that. No so Jerry, what about you? When you looked at this list, did you feel it was complete, or did you, like Jenny, think there was some stuff missing from it?
I felt like there was a lot of things missing from it. So for undergrad, I attended Florida A&M University, and I got my master's at Clark Atlanta University. Those are both historically Black colleges and universities. And I'm at the George Washington right now getting my doctorate degree, and I see a big difference, a vast difference in the funding. Historically, Black colleges and universities are massively underfunded. So even where we want to put resources in spaces for LGBTQ queer youth who want to attend HBCUs, it's difficult because we just don't have the funding and we just don't have the manpower that other non-HBCU schools get. So that was before I could even go down all of the put in place to make a student feel safe. Where is the funding that's going to allow us to run these programs and to provide these safe spaces for students and to provide the mental health support that LGBTQ students need when they do transition off to college and are independent? Those were the things that I was trying to actually grasp with. And I just saw that there is a big distinction between the two. And it led me to a second thought. It led me to a thought of, okay, well, if I have a Black if I have a Black young student who is getting ready to go to college and I want to make sure that I'm safe, does that automatically say I can't go to any of the 107 Black historically colleges because they're underfunded? Not because they don't want to make sure that I'm safe. Is it because they're underfunded and they can't ensure my safety because they're just not getting the funding that the other schools are getting?
That's a really fascinating point. When Title IX came up right away, my brain went to there's so little funding to train people to know how to interpret and enforce Title IX correctly. And so you have people decided to being coordinators, for example, who don't even know what it means, and certainly not in inclusive ways. But clearly this trickles down in lots of other ways. So it looks like supportive staff, trained staff, paid staff for students. And then as we get into HBCUs, there's even less of that, which I think creates more and more barriers for people. And I think that's stuff that a lot of people don't think about. So Jerry, because you're still, going through your education, could you talk a little bit about what your experience has been as an organizer doing this work on campuses, especially in light of COVID, because that has entered an entirely new wrinkle to this conversation. So as though there wasn't discrimination and there wasn't a lack of funding, COVID has really thrown even more chaos into this. Is there anything that you have seen and that people should be paying attention to because it has maybe created some new challenges?
I definitely think it's creating a separation with creating our chosen family in school. When I was a freshman at FAMU, I was able to kind of move around and create the family that I needed, the support system that I needed as a freshman in college away from my family. Although we are trying at George Washington, it's just you need to be able to meet up with people and make that connection. So it's a little harder to develop that connection, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah, and Jenny, because you talked a lot about trans and non-binary students, could you talk a little bit more about the very specific needs and sort of the emerging needs that we're seeing? So it's not that the needs did not exist for students, but we're starting to talk about them more. So certainly providing inclusive healthcare and housing, but are there any other things that students are talking about that I need when I get to campus, especially as a queer student, that you are seeing because you are right in the middle of this work?
Yeah, so what I would say that where things are with COVID is, students are just, in general, all students are a lot less engaged. This is echoes what Jerry just said, are not connected, don't have the sense of support of a community of a sort of chosen family to be there for them. And LGBTQ plus students, particularly trans students, really feel a lack of sense of belonging on college campuses in the best of times. And it's just gotten so much worse during the pandemic for trans students just feeling completely disconnected and not having the support. And that's often really hard for some trans students because they don't have the support at home.
Yeah.
For a lot of students who are LGBTQ plus, particularly at this point, the T students, look forward to college if they're going to college, and if they're going away to college, to be able to finally be themselves after years, maybe a decade or more of having to hide who they are, of not really be true to themselves, finally can be on their own and be able to explore their gender identity, and then are stuck home for a year and a half. And what that has done to be able to sort of squelch them even further. It's going to be a real challenge for all of us in higher ed, I think, for this coming year to really not only support first-year students who, as seniors in high school, had this experience, but also for our first-year students who were either on campuses and didn't have much going on, didn't have a chance to connect with many people, had to keep their distance literally and figuratively, or were just completely remote for that period of time and really don't have the connections with campus and with folks on campus, and don't really have a sense of belonging on campus at all at this point.
Yeah, and I think so many people are coming out of COVID with a lot of anxiety, with a lot of depression of what was going on, and knowing that this is a student population that tends to experience that at significantly higher rates because of the experiences they are forced to go through. I want to ask you both about a topic that is very dear to me, which is looking at curriculum. That was not mentioned at all in this article. Could either of you, or I'd love to hear from both of you, could you talk about is looking to see if there is any LGBTQ curriculum being offered, whether that is a queer studies program, or if you start seeing things like LGBT history or literature or in the sciences, is that an indicator that you would see as something that people should look for? Is that sort of one of those, it tends to be a positive sign?
I would think that would be a great sign. I think it would be very supportive to see that in the programming. Again, but I also don't want to leave out the schools that want to do those things, but just can't afford to do those things. So I do think that it would be nice and supportive, but not all schools have the funding or have the resources to provide that service.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to that. That it's important to have those courses, and it does send a positive signal that a campus has faculty that's interested in LGBTQ plus studies. Oftentimes, those are courses that are taught by out faculty, so that's important to have faculty who can be mentors and role models. But as Jerry said, a lot of campuses don't have the means to be supporting faculty whose line is to be doing research in LGBTQ plus studies. So I would not necessarily hold that against an institution if they don't. I think a bigger issue is just curricular inclusion. Do courses in different fields like sociology, history, psychology, where it makes real good sense to be including the experiences of LGBTQ people. Are they actually doing so?
Yeah. And that is an opportunity that I think lots of places have. Even if you don't have the dedicated classes, there are ways to be inclusive, but it again needs to be a priority to people. So the article, it was certainly written primarily for students to look at and to sort of have this checklist. But I want to talk about supportive parents, because a lot of parents are really concerned. I mean, sending your kids off to school is intimidating no matter what. There's a lot of things people worry about. So what kind of recommendations do we have for parents? I want to know very specifically, what questions should parents be asking, especially parents who are supportive of their queer kids, especially their kids who are out? What sort of things should they be looking for? And I also want to know, what are some of those red flags too? If there's something that you see or hear, what should maybe either make you ask more questions, or maybe look in another direction? And maybe, Jenny, we could start with you and then talk to Jerry.
Yeah, I have a lot of suggestions. First off, look at the Campus Pride Index. Most of the schools who are considered to be the most LGBT supportive are listed. I would say, to going to the red flag aspect, stay away from any college that does not list its campus LGBT resources on its website. That doesn't take a whole lot to do. And if they're not listed or they're few listed, it shows a real lack of commitment to LGBTQ plus students. I would also say to stay away from any college that does not have an LGBTQ center or some sort of support person whose job it is to be providing support to LGBTQ plus students, because that again demonstrates a commitment that shows that a college is concerned about LGBTQ plus individuals. If there's no one doing that work, chances are that work is not being done, or is being done piecemeal by students who are struggling with so much else in their lives to try to make that happen. If there is an LGBTQ plus center on campus, or staff people whose job it is to support those students, be talking to them. Find out what the campus climate is like. I'm always happy to talk with parents. I can't tell you just how wonderful. I've been doing this work for 20 plus years, and I can still remember the first time a parent of a gay child came into my office wanting to know what the campus was going to be like for their gay son. I was just blown away, because I never, this was like 20 years ago. I had never experienced having that situation. And of course, after that ensuing years, that was a more common experience. And then when the same thing started happening with the parents of trans kids, of having them come into my office and be asking those kind of questions, I just loved it to see that there's that kind of support, that they're fighting for their kid to get the best possible education and the best possible support as a LGBTQ plus person. So I love it when parents reach out to me. So don't be afraid to reach out to whoever on campus is doing the LGBTQ plus work to really find out what's going on. And I would also say, don't ignore the local community. In looking at a campus, it's great to know what resources they have, what supports are there. But students are going to be off campus as well. They may be living off campus after their first year or two. So they need to be able to feel safe and comfortable going off campus. So look at what it's like to be living in whatever city or town that the campus is in.
Thank you. That's a really interesting point about looking not just at the campus, but the environment around it, because campuses are typically assumed to be pretty progressive, more inclusive, but it doesn't always mean that the communities around them are necessarily safe. And I think that's a great point. I also like your point to ask questions, like reach out to people and literally ask the questions. And how lovely is it that we have so many parents asking the right questions to us? So Jerry, what do you think? What do you think parents should be looking at? And I also throw in a few things for students too, if because a lot of these parents who are supportive are having conversations with their kids. So what things should people be looking for to you?
So I kind of wanted to piggyback off the community aspect as well. This is non-traditional, but I say go to the clubs. If you are a student who is visiting that weekend, and if you are 18, and if you are a parent who is comfortable enough to go out to the clubs, because you're going to school, but you're also living in this environment, it is likely that you're probably going to go to the social environment. See what the club environment is like. See what there you can talk to the students. There you can get the real, you can get the experience of what it's like to have a social life there and have an education in the same setting. Also go on campus and ask the students questions, see what it's like to actually be on campus, and see if you see students that may identify as the same way as you. I think creating that connection prior to getting there. I know that some schools have usually a summer program or an earlier program where you can have a small experience before you actually go into the school and see if that is an option for you. And just connect with your local people who have gone to that school. I know that there's usually some high school connections that you may have with somebody who has gone to the high school before you. Ask them what their experience is like, even if they're not queer, and ask them what the queer life is like, if they may know themselves.
I actually have a question. I was wondering if one of you can answer this. Would you also ask about how campus security or campus police are trained? Would that be a question worth asking? Because I think there are a lot of challenges in a lot of different ways without going too deeply into this. But would that be an appropriate question and something that might be kind of telling about what is going on that campus?
Yes, absolutely. I would ask that. And I would also Google the school. I always Google the school and put LGBT issues or LGBT concerns. And if something pops up, I read it. Hopefully nothing pops up, but you'd be surprised. Google and Reddit has a lot of information on there before you even go to the schools.
Yeah.
Definitely. At UMass Amherst, I train our police fairly regularly about LGBTQ plus concerns. That's not common on many campuses that goes on. So finding out what the public safety or police on that campus, what their training is and what people's experiences are with them. I love the idea of Googling and see if there anything comes up about any incidents that may have taken place, like any hate crimes that may have taken place on that campus, for example.
Mm-hmm. And how it was handled, how the school officially responded, how students, I think that response stuff is really, really telling. There was a really interesting question that came up in the chat, and I'm going to read it to both of you because I think we are primarily talking about four-year schools, and yet that's really exclusionary to students who do two-year programs or perhaps trade schools. So do you have any specific recommendations at what to look at if you're looking at things like community colleges or trade schools? So where maybe there isn't a living on campus environment, does it look a little bit different in those spaces?
It does look different because oftentimes you're not dealing with a residential situation. You're not dealing with like healthcare provided on campus oftentimes. So the resources are much more limited. The student affairs offices are much less robust. There may be a couple people who are in student services there. So a lot of the issues, a lot of the need for support comes up in the classroom context because students are mostly on campus to be taking classes, and that's it. So really you want to focus for community colleges on what the classroom environment is like and what the institution is doing to make sure that particularly trans students are being respected in the classroom. So make sure that whatever name they use for themselves is what appears on course rosters, for example. Make sure that pronouns are respected. Make sure that there are out faculty who can be supportive of trans students and LGBT students in general, I would say.
Yeah. And Jerry, anything that you want to add on to that?
I just want to completely agree with what you just said. I definitely agree. I will always say visit the schools as well. I think sometimes having that face-to-face interaction pre-COVID would also give you a nice feel of how the interaction would be with the school, and if you would be supportive, or if there are people who identify the same with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Jerry, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned all the programs that you've been doing, so you've been doing your education for a while. Could you just talk a little bit about how you have seen things evolve? I mean, you've been in school for now several years. Are you starting to see changes? Is this conversation becoming more mainstream, or does it still to you need to be driven by queer students, queer faculty, supportive parents, or is this bubbling up more in a mainstream conversation?
I'm seeing it bubbling up more in a mainstream conversation. I just think I would like to see more representation. I just want to see more of my people sharing our aspect of it, and just to actually share what they're going through. So, because I think that's this aspect that's probably a little bit missing.
Yeah, and to talk about it, I think, across different dimensions. Because again, we're trying to take this in a single thing, and I'm so glad you brought up HBCUs, because it reminds us that we're not just talking on one plane of difference. We're talking on many, and trying to understand that is different. And Jenny, could you point to any specific policy changes that you are starting to see that you think are extremely forward thinking? Has there been anything that has bubbled up that you've seen on the horizon that you're thinking, this is where it needs to be, this is where everyone needs to go? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The University of California system just implemented a policy around name and gender that I think is really where we need to go, so that students are seen as their gender identity in all contexts. The name that they use for themselves is their name in all contexts, unless their legal name has to be used, but even there it shouldn't be made public. Basically treating someone's dead name, the name that a trans person no longer uses, one that they were assigned at birth, treating that name like a social security number. It doesn't ever get out, no one ever sees it. It's considered priority information. So I think that policy is really forward thinking. It's one we are at UMass Amherst going to hopefully have that same policy next year. And I also say, as I mentioned earlier, assigning housing by gender identity is a really forward-thinking policy that all colleges that offer housing need to do.
And one more question that just popped up as you were talking about that is, often students, students who have supportive parents have parents who will advocate for them, parents who will help them make these changes or assert that these changes need to be made. Can both of you, just as we start wrapping up, give some advice to students maybe who don't have supportive families, who need to have these conversations and make these negotiations in the absence of a supportive family? And even in cases, so let's talk about name policy, where families don't necessarily know yet. Do you have any recommendations either for ways that they should approach it, or resources that you know of that you think would provide them with some guidance? Because it is daunting to get into this. Starting university is daunting, never mind trying to start university and in some ways almost start your life.
The Campus Pride has the Campus Pride Ultimate Career Guide. I would say start there. It has a list of questions you should ask yourself and ask about the campus, and it kind of guides you in the right direction for both HBCUs and non-HBCUs.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So definitely check out that Campus Pride. Jenny, any suggestions from you?
Yeah, I would say it is daunting and it can be scary. I would say if you're an incoming student or whether it's a first-year student, transfer student, talk to other students. Find out how they manage the system, how they work things, and also use them as your support. Use them as your social network. If you don't have a supportive family at home, turn to other folks for support, for that kinship network, to be your sort of chosen family. That is so important to do, to try to connect with other people.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, and I probably should have asked this first. Normally is my first question, but I got a little overexcited about this topic. Jerry, could you quickly summarize for people maybe who don't know Campus Pride very well, what Campus Pride does and quickly how to find it?
You can go to campuspride.org, and Campus Pride brings together different universities together that will advocate for LGBTQIA youth policy across campuses.
Excellent, excellent.
And I would add to that, you can also find on there, I'm the Trans Policy Clearinghouse Coordinator for Campus Pride, and we have on the Campus Pride website lists of the colleges that have different trans supportive policies, so you can see the institutions that a child is looking to attend, what sort of supports they have in place.
Thank you so much. And I noticed in the questions, people wanted to know what the best school to go to is, and it probably depends on what you want to do and who you are. So please, everybody.
Amherst.
There's going to be a throwdown before this is over. I can feel it coming. I love this. Thank you both so much. Please get a Campus Pride, check out that list, ask the right questions, assert yourself because you deserve to have a great campus experience. Jenny, Jerry, thank you so much for spending time with us and answering questions. And please, if we ever have anything you want to talk about, let us know because we'd love to bring you back.
Thanks. We'd love to be back.
Thank you. Well, everybody, that gets us through another week yet again. We will be back next week. I will ostensibly have more offensive rainbow garb to scare Liz with, but it's kind of fun. So as we wrap up every single week, we remind you to run fast, to laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. If you need support, please visit us at pflag.org. We would love to support you because we are everybody's family. Have a great week. Please get vaccinated, do the right thing, and we will see you very soon. Bye, everybody.